Thank you, Vicki, for sharing your story with such transparency and such vulnerability and such courage. And I'm thankful for the grace of God working through your life, ministering to women like Jackie, whose lives are being touched in the midst of chaos. And an update, Jackie will be giving birth to a beautiful baby in about 10 days. So we can thank and praise God for how he has intervened in her story. Don, about a year ago, introduced Vicki and I have been encouraged by the work that God is doing through her and her staff at Choices as they're ministering to women, as they're ministering to children, and they're ministering to families. My name is David Williams, and my wife, Tari, and I and our 6 children. One, my son, Sakari, is with me. My son, DJ, is here with me today. We've been attending Discovery for about a year and a half. And you know, when we think about and when we talk about the topic of unplanned pregnancy, unintended pregnancy, and abortion, our minds right away go to the preborn baby that God is knitting together in the womb of a woman. Our mind goes right away to the woman who is carrying that child or the woman who is suffering trauma from an abortion. But oftentimes we forget that there is another party that is involved, that there are men that are involved, and men are impacted by unplanned pregnancies, and men are impacted by abortion as well. I tell you, this morning, you're looking at a man who has been wounded, who has experienced great pain, who has experienced shame and guilt, who has experienced great loss because of abortion in my life. And yet you're looking at a man who knows the forgiveness, the grace, the healing, the restoration of our great God because of his amazing and abundant grace. As Vicki did, I want to share with you a little of my story. I grew up in a family where neither one of my parents were Christians, and a legacy of the men, you would find things, sexual immorality, marriage, adultery, divorce, and little to no relationship with children. I grew up watching my dad verbally assault my mom to the point where she would be in tears literally every week. I grew up never seeing my dad kiss my mom, hug my mom, tell my mom he loved her, but seeing him verbally beat her down week after week. I grew up with my dad physically at times abusing my brother and I. I saw my dad who treated my mom this way, treating other women as if they were queens. And I knew as a very little boy that my dad was having sex with other women outside of my mom. I grew up with my dad giving me messages of, this is what it means to be a man, David, and pretty much my dad out of his lips told me that this is how you should be as a man. My father and mother divorced when I was 11 years of age, and that brought a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. And even though my dad wasn't the greatest man, I loved my dad. And I longed for the affection and love of my dad, and it hurt deeply when my dad was no longer in the house. When I was about 8 years of age, my grandmother began taking me to church, and I began to hear the message of Jesus, began to hear the message of God's forgiveness and God's love and of Jesus dying on the cross for sin. But as a little boy, I didn't even realize that I was all that sinful. As I looked at my life in comparison to others around me, I thought that I was pretty okay. So the message didn't impact me all that much. My mother started going to church after my mom and dad divorced, and there was a man who was at the church who took an interest in my mom. The only thing is that this guy was married and he had 5 kids and he was on staff at the church. He was the minister of music. And from the time I was 11 years of age until the time I was 18, this guy was in a relationship with my mom. Can you imagine as a boy, my thought processes? I had such a distorted view, one, of God. I had a distorted view of what it meant to be a man. I had a distorted view of what it meant to be a husband, what it meant to be a father. I had a distorted view of sex. I had a distorted view of family. But, the church, the message of the gospel at the time, I think that it really didn't have any effect or any meaning. It didn't seem to change other people's lives who said that they did it. I just saw people coming in, raising their hands, living one way in a church service and living a different way outside of it. So when I graduated from high school, I graduated from church. I didn't feel like I needed God. And I thought a college education was going to give me everything I needed for my future. My mom was the highest educated person in my family, and she had an associate degree. The first person in my family to go on to get a 4-year degree. And I really thought that getting an education would transform my life. It was the ticket to my future. So I was going to school with the goal that I was going to finish and get a degree. And along the way, I was going to have fun along the way. Even though I had grown up in a bunch of chaos, I had never had sex in high school. And in college, actually, one of my goals is that I'm going to have a girlfriend and I'm going to have sex. I had such a distorted view. My second year of school, I got into a relationship with a young lady. We thought we loved each other. We both were from single-parent homes. We both had daddy wounds. We found ourselves in this relationship that became sexual very quickly. And within 3 months, she came to me with a message that I wasn't ready to hear and wasn't wanting to hear. She came to me and said, "David, I'm pregnant." And pretty much was asking me the question, what are we going to do? As I contemplated what we were going to do, this is what went through my mind. I don't know how to be a dad. I don't know how to be a husband. I'm not ready to be a dad. I'm not ready to be a husband. I'm not ready to drop out of school in order to be a dad and to be a husband. And so I love you. We can get married later on. We can always have a family. But right now, this is an interference to both of our dreams and to both of our plans. So I told her the best thing for us to do is to get rid of the baby. And it seemed like this was okay with her, but every day she asked me the same question for weeks. "David, what do you think we should do?" And every time my answer was slower coming back, but I kept coming back with the same answer. "I think this is the right thing to do." We actually involved our moms. We told our mothers that she was pregnant, and our mothers said, "Well, what are you going to do?" We told them what we were thinking, and they looked at us and said, "Based on where you are in life and based on what's ahead of you, we think the way you're thinking is actually right. You are young. You can get your degree. You can get married later. You can always have a family. We think it's the right thing to do." She actually has the abortion during the summer, and we're away from each other. We lived in different cities. I'm a man who's telling her that I think you should go ahead and have an abortion. We're not ready to be parents or get married, and this is just going to mess up our plans and our dreams. But yet I wasn't man enough to get on a plane, to get in my car, and to drive her to the abortion clinic. That morning, her mother takes her to the abortion clinic. Before she heads to the abortion clinic, she talks to me on the phone, and one last time she asked me the question, "David, do you think this is the right thing to do?" Looking back in hindsight, she was wanting me to be the man and to step up and to protect the baby and to protect her. But you know what I did? I said the same thing. I think it's the right thing to do. She goes and she has the abortion. I speak to her afterwards and she is traumatized. I mean, she is crying so profusely. I can't even understand what she's saying. And I'm sitting there on the phone thinking that this is a young lady that I love and I didn't even protect her. And though I wasn't a Christian and I did not know God, I knew the decision that I made. I literally sacrificed my child on the altar of my future. For my education, for my plans and my dreams, I esteemed that my life, my plans, my dreams were more important than this child, and I sacrificed my child on the altar of my future. I thought that everything would be okay. She would, in a short time, she would get over it. We would continue as usual. In a short time, she didn't get over it. Within 3 months, we were broken up, and there was great pain and there was great loss in my life. And I had so much anger that was inside of me that now was just erupting like a volcano. I was so depressed and I would go down into these deep, deep valleys and I didn't know when I would come out. I drank before the abortion, but before it was to have fun and to be the life of the party. Afterwards, I was drinking to drown my sorrows because I just wanted to forget about the pain that was in my life. She was the very first girl that I had ever slept with, and I thought I was doing it because I loved her. But afterwards, I became very promiscuous and I began to sleep with many women. And it was another way for me to medicate my pain, and I didn't care anything about them. And I had this unhealthy desire that I'm going to finish my education because I have to be successful because I have failed so greatly. Well, I graduated from college and I got a degree and it didn't fix anything. I ended up getting a job at the university where I graduated, and there was a young lady that was there. We got into a relationship, and she comes back to me in a few weeks, and she says, "David, I'm pregnant." As she tells me this, I'm thinking of what's already happened in my life, and I don't want to do what I did at 19 years of age because it didn't fix anything. It didn't help anything. It caused more pain and more brokenness. But at the same time, I wasn't ready to get married and I wasn't ready to be a dad. But she's saying to me, I can't be a mom on my own. And when she said that through my ears, this is what I heard. She never said it, but this is what I heard. That, David, if you're not with me, I'm going to have an abortion because I can't be a mom on my own. So you know what I did? I told her I'll marry her. I had no idea who I was. I had no idea who she was. But this time I'm thinking I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to atone for my sin. I'm going to atone for the mistakes of my past and I'm going to do the right thing this time. Well, I get married to her. Guess what? Nothing changes about my heart. I could put a ring on her finger and a ring on mine and say I do, but nothing changes about my heart. I am still the same broken man who's tied up in sin, who's angry, and my anger is spilling out on her. I'm depressed, and I'm in these deep, deep valleys. Now I'm committing adultery on my wife because I'm still running around trying to medicate my pain. I'm running around getting drunk because I'm trying to medicate my pain. I go back to school because a bachelor's degree didn't give me what I thought it would give me, so I go back to school to get a master's degree because maybe that will be what solves the Rubik's Cubes and help me to solve the matrix. And that doesn't fix anything either. Our son is born. Should be a great day. A man's having a son. But my heart is so numb. I can't even bond with my son. Find it hard to bond with him. I continue this pattern for the next few years, and we find ourselves going through a divorce. During this time, God actually put a man in my life, first guy I'd ever seen who lived what it meant to be an authentic Christian. He just didn't say it with his lips. He just didn't go to church and throw his hands up to some songs and listen to a sermon. He lived it. He lived it before me in such a way that his life was compelling to me. His life spoke to me. It showed me something that I was missing in my life. The gospel was shared and God drew me to himself, and God began to radically transform my life. He began to overwhelm me with his forgiveness and with his love, and he began to radically transform my life. There were some things that God broke off of my life immediately. From the day that I said yes to Jesus, and that was 23 years ago, to this day, the only woman that I have had sex with is my wife, Taria, who I've been married to for 19 years. I have never been drunk a day since that day that I bowed my knee to the Lord Jesus Christ. I used to have a mouth that cursed like a sailor, and the Lord, as he cleansed my heart, he cleansed my mouth. The altar that I laid my child down on, education and a career, were things in a very short time that I walked away from to begin to minister the glorious gospel of Christ to young people. Many young men like me who didn't have a father in their life had no idea of what it meant to be a man and to live in this world in a way that honors God, and God began to use me to minister to them. But then I married my wife 3 years after coming to know Christ. And my wife's a godly woman. Everything that I've shared with you in my story, she knew before she said I do. In fact, it was the things that caused her to want to say I don't. But God spoke to her and said, this is the one I've called for you. And she's a godly woman. And I'm walking with the Lord, but there's some things in my life I can't break free from. I'm angry. And sadly, my anger is coming out on my wife. And we started to have kids, and my anger is coming out on my kids. And I regret the things that I've done to my wife and my kids in my anger. I would walk around with depression, and my wife and kids would never know when I was going in or when I was coming out, and they'd feel like they have to walk on eggshells around me. I found it hard to bond with our older kids as they were born. It was this thing that just felt like I was stuck and I couldn't bond with them. I felt paralyzed every time there was an opportunity to make a big decision. I felt like I was paralyzed. I still had this desire to be successful, but now I'm in ministry. And it's supposed to be about God, and it's supposed to be about his glory, but yet I'm preaching about Christ with my lips, but if I'm honest, it's really about me and my heart. And there's a man in the course of time that I shared my story with, and I was invited to speak at a pregnancy center banquet. And as I spoke and as I shared my story, there was a gentleman in the audience who did anecdotal research on the effects of abortion in men. He gives me his card and he says, David, give me a call. And I gave him a call, and he asked me a question that sounded a little ridiculous to me. He goes, David, how have you allowed Jesus to heal the wound of abortion in your heart? By this time, it had been 22 years since the abortion. It had been 15 years that I had been a Christian, and I was thinking, surely God has healed the wound of abortion in my heart. I didn't say that to him. I said to him, I've never specifically asked Jesus to heal that wound. So he asked me, could he send me a book called Fatherhood Aborted? And could he set me up with a male peer counselor at a pregnancy center to go through an abortion recovery Bible study? I said yes to him. When I got the book and began to read it, those things that I couldn't break free from, I began to see that there was a connection to the abortion in my life. And until I allowed the Lord to really deal with those things, there would be areas of pain that I would never be able to get free from until I opened up and invited Jesus to touch them with his nail-scarred hands. And we began to go through this abortion recovery Bible study, and God began to minister levels of forgiveness and grace and healing to me that I didn't even know that I needed, that deeply impacted my relationship with God, that deeply impacted my relationship with my wife. In fact, this year I had my 49th birthday, and every year we go around and my wife has for every member of the family to say something good about the person whose birthday it is. This is what my wife said. She looked at our kids and she said, I want you to realize how gentle God has made your father. He's blessed our marriage. I'm still a man in process. He's blessing me as a father. He's blessing me in ministry to be able to now minister to other men and help them to walk through the pain of the loss of fatherhood and the wounds of abortion. And so as I think of being on mission with God, the first thing I think of is my family. Here's my son, Sakari, from my first marriage, and by the grace of God, we have a fairly good relationship. In fact, he even helps me with some ministry things. And my family is a tangible expression of God's grace and mercy to my life. As I've gone through the generational sins, God has blessed me to know Christ, and he wants to break those generational sins, and for me to first ministry and first mission to pass along a legacy of faith to my children, and then the privilege of being able to partner with him to come alongside of young people and men and to minister to them in the midst of their chaos.